Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 86, and lots of going on in the news, but we want you to sit and relax and realize that if you like your Anglican Unscripted, you can keep your Anglican Unscripted. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and today's November 22nd, 2013.
George, let's move on to story one this weekend. Well, we're Anglican Unscripted, so we'll talk about Anglican stories. And while it's not that we're looking for more stories, but we're actually going back to GAFCON stories. And we're doing more GAFCON stories because GAFCON is still in the news 3 weeks out. Not because of GAFCON, but because of characters in GAFCON and outside of GAFCON. Specifically, Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, and Archbishop Wabakula. We've heard some statements internally and externally about Archbishop Justin Welby where he's seemed to take a distinction in this GAFCON movement that is bothersome to me. He's like that professor that stands up in front of the class and says, well, all things being equal, this is just another link in the chain. And I'm like, well, let's back up here. All things being equal, you've made GAFCON the same as what's going on over here with deposing priests and killing the orthodoxy in the church. We really need to talk about this, and that's what story one is for. George, story one, let's talk about the 3 weeks since GAFCON. What has the Archbishop been telling people on and off the record?
Oh, Kevin, you're right. This story's not dying. Usually we'd be into something completely different by now, but GAFCON still keeps coming back, and it came back on Monday. Archbishop of Canterbury addressed the General Synod of the Church of England, and he summarized his recent activities, and he talked about GAFCON. And he started off on the wrong foot. For many viewers, or for some viewers, such as me, because the first thing he said was, I went to Kenya to give support and succor to the Kenyan people following the Westgate Mall bombing. Well, we've been all through that story half a dozen times, it seems, and he's still coming back and preaching it, even though everybody who follows this, especially in the GAFCON world, knows it's not true. And then he goes on to sing the moral equivalence song of GAFCON's as good or as bad as the Episcopal Church. It's one voice among many. Well, you remember Peter Akinola blew a gasket when Justin Welby said this in Nairobi. And we're also hearing people tell us, oh, you guys are being too hard on Justin because we've talked to people who've been in private meetings with him, and he's really supportive of our point of view. And Kevin, I pray that I just am totally messed up, that I've got the flu and my brain isn't working well. But gosh, right now, I'm really concerned because the words aren't matching the deeds. I want Justin Welby to succeed. I pray he succeeds. Eliud Wabakula was asked at a speech last Thursday at Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, St. Andrew's Church, what should we do for Justin Welby? What can we do? And his word is pray, pray, pray. And I'm praying for Justin Welby. But man, there's a degree of spiritual warfare out there that is just frightening.
Well, it's frightening. What we look at as press people and as lay people and a clergy person in the church is the tale of two archbishops right now. We have what he tells people internally, yeah, I support GAFCON and the church needs reformation and I'm going to reform England and bring it back evangelically to a knowledge of Christ and stuff like that. But outside we see something different, and that's kind of poo-pooing the work he's doing. And when he goes, everybody anybody who has a little inside knowledge of how he got to GAFCON knows that the Westgate Mall had nothing to do with it. It was a convenient terrorist attack for Lambeth Palace to make an excuse of why he's there. But all of his arrangements were being pre-planned long before Westgate happened. And Lambeth, if you want to call me on that, we'll provide you the documentation. it's a reality. We need to stop using that as an excuse. I see no photo ops or anything of him at any of the Westgate things or mentioning Westgate Mall at all. We need to leave that in the past and talk about what Justin Welby was really doing. And I think what Justin Welby did was he arrived on the ground and said, this is bigger than I thought it was. I'm in it over my head, and I don't know what GAFCON is, and I don't know if I want to be a part of GAFCON. And I think that's how he flew out of there.
And Kevin, it's not just GAFCON. On Thursday last week, Archbishop Welby had an interview published in the Times of London by Ruth Gledhill. And one of the topics was church schools. And Archbishop Welby was quoted in the article saying that the Church of England is going to relax the faith requirements for admissions to church schools, make it not as big a deal in the admissions process. And immediately after that article came out, I got an email. There was an email blast to reporters from the Archbishop's interim press officer saying this is untrue, with a correction from Justin Welby. He didn't say this. And then the director of communications for the Church of England put out a statement the next morning saying Ruth Gledhill was engaged in creative writing. And that, you just don't do that. Ruth Gledhill is one of the best and most she's tops in the profession. And to call her a liar, that's an extraordinary thing. And she then released a copy of the transcript of the interview, and what she wrote was what Justin Welby said. Now, you and I, Kevin, have we ever misspoken? Where we said things we didn't quite mean, or we didn't quite explain ourselves well?
You might have, yeah. I agree you might have done that, yes.
And we try to clear it up, and you just go on. You make a mistake. Oh, I spoke too strongly, or that's not what I meant what I said. In other words, life doesn't end if you make a misstatement. But for some reason, the staff surrounding the Archbishop of Canterbury decided, instead of trying to explain away a mistake or clarify a mistake, let's get Ruth Gledhill personally by saying she was engaged in creative writing. To me, that's just a bad sign of the environment there.
Yeah. I mean, you and I, early on, have always had a lot of hope for Justin Welby.
And we still do. We still do.
We still do. Clearly, he's evangelical. He believes in Jesus. Two of my main qualifications to be Archbishop of Canterbury. Other than that, I see...
Beard?
Yeah, he doesn't have the beard, but everybody has their shortcoming, and that's Justin Welby's. But other than that, we live in this earnest reality that England is in a different time and place than the rest of the Anglican Communion. They're still back in these almost pre-colonial day where they think they get to sit at tea and lead the party. And those days are gone. You're no longer leading this tea party. And Anglicanism is going to move on without you. And that's the biggest thing that's happened in the last 10 years is the office of Canterbury is null and void.
And Kevin, it's not just Kevin Colson, folks, who's saying this. Eliud Wabakula, the Archbishop of Kenya and the head of GAFCON, the chairman of the GAFCON, Primate of Council of Primates, last week in South Carolina said we Anglicans have to examine the place of the Archbishop of Canterbury in the great scheme of things. To be an Anglican, must you be in some sort of fellowship or unity with the Archbishop of Canterbury? Or should we be a confessing body? In other words, it's what we believe, not who we know. And the Nigerians did this 4 or 5 years ago, where they said, we're no longer going to define ourselves by who we're in relationship with, but what we believe. And now GAFCON is expanding that circle. And Kevin, you're right, the old ways are done. I'm not saying, I don't know what's in Justin Welby's heart. I am not saying anything against his moral character. All I'm saying is that the package that's being presented to the wider world, to the press, to knowledgeable people who follow this closely, it's not a good one.
It's not a good one. However, I think starting today, we've entered into the post-Canterbury age. On the other side of the country, I'm talking to Alan Haley, and right now we're going to have competition of the baritones. We're both suffering little colds, so if we don't not really enunciating the words or we sound really low, blame the virus.
Right.
Now, last week George and I took the challenge of talking about the legal situation that was going on in Quincy, the new legal action by the Episcopal Church, not the old diocese of Quincy, but the Episcopal Church and the Diocese of Chicago to try and reclaim property.
Correct.
And George and I went the extra length and blamed things that you can't do. And I wanted to protect you and not have you in the show when we took on that challenge. If you guys want to go back and haven't seen it, that's episode 85. This is different. We're going to talk about some of the strategy that the Episcopal Church is using and some of the things that are going to work against them in this. The Diocese of Quincy is one of the original lawsuit dioceses.
All right.
It's been going on now for almost 3 years, 4?
Since 2009.
For a very long time.
Right.
They won in court. Tad, yourself, the legal team had done a great job, set up well within the knowledge of the laws of the state of Illinois. You knew what you could and couldn't do. You knew that you had the law on your side. And you had a judge who sat down and really took his time to understand what was going on here.
Right. He looked at all the documents the Episcopal Church threw at him and said, I don't see anything in here that prevents the diocese from withdrawing. There's no language to that effect.
We now have the situation where there is no longer a remnant, an old Diocese of Quincy that can fight as a remnant. They merged with the Diocese of Chicago, and they're doing the suit in a really different way where they're saying, we used to be the Diocese of Quincy, we're now the Diocese of Chicago, we still have the right, because we were once in the Diocese of Quincy, to sue.
Right.
How does that work?
Well, only if you're in some sort of fantasy land, in my opinion, because that's a unique and novel theory. It's the Diocese of Chicago and the Episcopal Church, let's make clear, in the second suit, they're going after not the Anglican Diocese of Quincy and its assets, but they're going after the parishes in the Anglican Diocese and their properties, which were not involved in the first suit. And so after the first suit, they lost the first suit. Now they're taking a second bite at the apple and trying to say that we go after the parishes. Well, the parishes, of course, are part and parcel of the Anglican Diocese. And if the Anglican Diocese, if the court found the Anglican Diocese could leave because there was no provision in the Episcopal Church's governing documents preventing a diocese from withdrawing, then necessarily the parishes who are members of that diocese leave at the same time the diocese does. It's not like an individual parish breaking off and deciding on its own to go there. They're doing this in a group as the Diocese of Quincy, Anglican Diocese of Quincy. So in the first case, I think the lawsuit against the parishes as a real handicap to overcome at first, because they lost the argument on the diocese leaving, and so what do they do about the fact that each parish they're suing is a member of that diocese that was allowed to leave? How can the court rule, oh, the diocese can leave, but the parishes can't? That just doesn't make sense. So,
Well,
yeah.
help me out here, because if I remember correctly, the Episcopal Church itself cannot hold or own property.
Correct. It is an unincorporated association that was organized in 1789, not under the laws of any particular state, but under the common law, as it came down to us from England at that time. And so it's never been organized under the laws of any particular state. It has its headquarters in New York, but those headquarters and that property is owned not by the unincorporated association, which is the Episcopal Church, but it's owned by the DFMS, the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society, which is a New York religious corporation the church set up in the 1820s and then modified in the 1840s. It's been around ever since then for the express purpose of holding title to church property and receiving donations and gifts, which the Episcopal Church, as I say, the unincorporated part of it, is not able to receive or hold.
Well,
So,
most people are probably pretty confused right now. What happens when the Episcopal Church goes into court and says we want that property is ours.
Ours. Well, that's the problem they face right now in the appeal from Judge Ortball's ruling, because they're the only party left on that appeal. There's no more a diocese to claim, hey, we're the real diocese and that's our money in our building. And so the Episcopal Church can't really come in and say, well, that's our money in our building, because they couldn't be on the title in the first place. And so it's an interesting game to see how far they're going to get with this contention on appeal, that they should somehow, the judge somehow got it wrong. So that's why I'm saying there are all kinds of conundrums raised by the legal strategy here, and which makes you have to question, Kevin, the motives of the people who are guiding this and what they really are trying to do. It seems to me, on the one hand, if you wanted to make things as expensive as possible for the poor little Anglican Diocese of Quincy and tie up all its funds and make it go through court for another 3-4 years, well, this is the kind of thing you would do. And at the same time, if you got proper legal advice, you would be told that you don't have a chance of success, a good chance of success, given these difficulties that you're under. And so if you make the decision to go ahead anyway and spend the money and put it through, one has to question just what are the motives here. Because
we need to be honest here in Anglican Unscripted. They've won with less.
correct.
Okay.
Right.
They've had less of a case and have won because some appellate person somewhere, some federal docket someplace, it got pushed on by with nobody noticing.
Well, we have to admit, right, the courts, this is the last most obscure area of the law for the courts to try to understand. And they have not really done a good job of it because they haven't been presented with that many cases of it. And it's very unusual to have a church litigating this much in court, because it's they're in violation of their own canons. Remember, there's that Episcopal Church canon that says no member of this church shall go into civil court to settle a dispute arising under the canons or to seek an interpretation of them. And yet that's what they're doing.
Sure.
And so not only are they, off in left field from my point of view of the legal arguments they're making, but they're once again violating their own canons in even pressing those arguments and coming into court to make them. So it's a very questionable enterprise. I'm still in the Episcopal Church. I'm trying to do all I can through my blog and everything to raise a level of awareness and attention of other fellow Episcopalians about what's going on here, the abuses of the system. And I don't know how much further we can do this, but it has to be carried on. It has to be, the message has to get out that this is not the way to run a church.
Well, yeah, I mean, both you and George are still in the Episcopal Church.
Correct.
And the reality is Anglican Unscripted works because you're still in the Episcopal Church. And Peter Olds in Canterbury. I mean, the group of us work as an entity in this arrangement. I don't know what we would do if you all of a sudden jumped to the ACNA. It would be a conundrum. But in as such, let's talk about the conundrum of they are recognizing them as Anglican churches in this lawsuit. If they belong to the Diocese of Quincy, I know that the canons of Quincy and the canons of the ACNA say the church belongs to the people.
Correct.
Not to the diocese.
Correct.
Isn't that an additional conundrum now that they've identified them as Anglican, therefore the church does belong to them?
Yes, and of course the Episcopal Church would answer, well, they weren't entitled to leave and join this other group in the first place, so we can't count the laws of that organization. But as I say, they lost on that argument in front of George Ortball, and I don't know how they're going to get anywhere in a different court in Peoria, because as soon as the Peoria court learns about what George Ortball decided and Judge Ortball decided, and learns that the parishes are constituent members of the diocese, seems to me the case is over. But
Now,
I've seen, I've been on the wrong side before. So
yeah, and we talked about that. But let's talk about court cost. Can the Episcopal Church be brought up for court cost?
at the end, yes. For example, the Judge Ortball awarded the Anglican Diocese its costs of suit. But when they appeal, that gets suspended pending the outcome of the appeal. So we won't know that for another 2 to 3 years. as to where it finally comes out. But you're right. Eventually, the losing party, after all the appeals, has to pay the costs of the other party, and those are not that significant. They can, because in this case, there were a few depositions, maybe, but not very many expensive court costs as such. And the main costs are the court transcripts, the cost of the appeal, and so on. But again, we're talking on the order of several thousands of dollars. Nothing really to write home about.
Okay, let's talk about the right of a lawyer to earn an income. Yourself and Tad have not taken a salary in this. I understand that there's been a fund set up to help with the legal fees.
Yes.
How do we send money to that? I'll put the address here at the bottom of the screen, but how does a person, and I'm sure we have wealthy people that donate to these types of things that watch the program. You know who you are. You know where your checkbook is. Go get it right now. And let's write a check to help pay the legal cost. How do they get a hold of you in this?
Okay. Well, it's very simple. The fund is administered by the American Anglican Council. And so the check should be made to the American Anglican Council. And the address, however, is for the Quincy Defense Fund, is in care of a particular clergy person in the Anglican diocese, and I'll get you that information so you can put it on the screen.
Thank you.
And it's sending in to that in Illinois. I want to stress that I myself will not get any money that has been donated or whatever, because I have already just said I'm donating all my services to the cause of Quincy without any cost. And so it's just to pay the local council there who bear the brunt of the work that this appeal should be made.
Alan, thank you again for your time. People don't know we taped late tonight for East Coast, and I appreciate your time today. I hope you feel better with your cold, and we'll catch you very soon.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.
George, let's move on to story 2, and we're going to talk about the Episcopal Church, our second favorite topic here at Anglican Unscripted, because it's really in a corporation that keeps feeding us news stories that bewilder us at times, and this week George and I are bewildered, not because of what made news, because of what did not make news. The Episcopal Church is stuck in a time before time. Currently, they're stuck in the 60s and 70s. Based on the last convention they had just had in Mississippi, where they went down to talk about racism in America, how it still exists, and the last 50 years since the signing of the Civil Rights Amendment. And they put out a nice internet poll asking people how they feel about racism, their attitude towards racism, and do they think America is still racist. And poof, we're here couple of days after the convention, and there was a secret story that was kind of just poofed out there, George, that nobody paid attention to because nobody cared at all about the racism conference, and nobody cares at all that the Episcopal Church actually may be the most racist organization in Christendom.
At the same time as the Episcopal Church is pumping up a fake conference, a fake crisis, excuse me. It was a real conference, but a fake crisis. On racism, it appoints a former Planned Parenthood executive to be its representative to a UN conference on women. Kevin, that's like holding a conference on anti-Semitism and appointing a former Nazi party official to be your representative. Planned Parenthood was formed to keep down the black population. It was formed to get rid of the surplus population, the undesirables, with the eugenic program. And today, the black abortion rates are just horrendous. And we're talking about racism and why it's so evil. At the same time, we're see nothing wrong about a Planned Parenthood representative being our person at the UN?
Yeah.
I just don't understand, Kevin.
It's bewildering, like we said at the beginning. Does racism exist in America? Yeah, but it's no longer institutional. I don't know if you guys watch TV. We know you watch Anglican Unscripted. We thank you for that. If you watch TV, we have a president named Barack Obama. He's Kenyan descent. Some people say he was born there. I don't believe that. Who is our president? He's African American. the richest woman in America. Her name is Oprah. I don't. Winfrey is her last name. She is worth $8.2 billion. She's African American. The Attorney General, the guy who will probably one day be in jail, his name is Eric Holder. He's also African American. I don't see institutional racism anymore. I don't see a purpose to have these little events down in Mississippi where we relive the 70s and we relive the 60s. What's next? The LSD convention?
Kevin, let me give you a little vignette. Now, my parish is in the deep south. I'm in that part of Florida that is not the coastal condo belt, but rural central Florida, orange groves, cattle, rednecks, crackers, if you will. My little tiny Episcopal church, its senior warden is a retired Archie Bunker type, a contractor from Long Island. The junior warden is a retired postman from Philadelphia named Willie, an African American. My treasurer is named June. She's originally from Taiwan and runs a Chinese restaurant. I could go on like that, but we have Jamaicans, West Indians, African Americans from up north. We have rural farmers. They all go to an Episcopal church and they all join and see and find God in their worship there. I don't see what the Episcopal Church is up to in this racism business because I just don't see it at work in the streets of a little southern town where I live and work.
Well, what this really points, George, is that they've lost any relevance whatsoever. The Episcopal Church is no longer relevant. They need to find something that makes them relevant. And we see this all the time with companies struggling to come up with a product, to be relevant again. Whatever happened to Microsoft? Whatever happened to Gateway Computer? I mean, you just go through all these old companies of the past that could not keep themselves relevant. Well, the Episcopal Church, once you've lost your focus on Christ and your relevance in preaching the gospel and knowing what the gospel is and how to hold people accountable when they don't preach the gospel, you've lost it all. And having old conventions now on racism, and I suppose the next one's going to be on women issues and glass ceilings. Wait a minute, the presiding bishop, what is she? She's female. Dang, you're going to have a hard time with that one too. You're trying to storm up storms of the past that aren't relevant anymore. And you need to move on. I moved on. George, have you moved on, George?
No, I never move on, Kevin. I'm not stuck in the 60s. I'm stuck in the 40s myself.
I'm still stuck and I can relate to this because my mom had the stir-fry period. When I was 15, my mom was watching TV and she saw this wok, W-O-K, woke. It's a Asian vessel made of aluminum, steel, or some type of metal, and it's hand stamped and pounded, and they sell it on TV. And you can only cook an wok with olive oils and peanut oils and all these types of things by adding strange-looking vegetables and occasional meat. And we had what my brother and I refer to as the woke stage in our lives, where Mom, for the period of about 2 years, it was probably only 2 months, but it felt like 2 years, everything had to be cooked in the wok. And we would wake up in the morning, sweat on our face. What's she going to cook tonight, Cat? I don't know. It was scary.
Where's the cat?
Where's the cat? The Episcopal Church needs to get past the woke stage and move on to other flavors of food. Okay, guys, if you're looking at the screen and you're having some deja vu, that is not Peter Old. That is his twin brother, David. And David's joining us all the way from Sydney, Australia. You're in Sydney, right? You're not in Melbourne on the other side. Okay.
I'm on the outskirts of Sydney now, but we're still Sydney, yes.
Yeah, it's important to check my facts during the show, not before the show.
Absolutely.
So, David actually came to visit the Coulson Chaos Manor this spring and brought his family. We had a lot of fun together.
That was a lot of fun.
It was a blast. You got a great family, and my daughters still miss yours. Your kids running around.
Well, we were chatting about you this morning when I was saying I was going to film a bit with Kevin, and they were like, "Oh, that's exciting, Kevin."
Yeah. So you in Australia are producing news, and when you produce news, you end up on Anglican Unscripted. and it's the magic how this works. But it was not you, it's the Diocese of Grafton that is producing news. Tell me what's happening there.
That's right. So the Diocese of Grafton is a mainly rural diocese with some small towns in the north of New South Wales, and they have elected as bishop as a lady called Reverend Dr. Sarah McNeil. Now that's a big deal here because that's the first diocesan bishop who's female in Australia. And we've had some assistant bishops before now in some of the metropolitan dioceses, but this is the first diocesan bishop. All well and good. We kind of expected that to happen. We wondered if Newcastle Diocese would do it earlier, but here they are. They've done it. And as Australian Anglicans, conservatives, we've understood that was coming. What was fascinating, however, is that immediately after the appointment was announced, I started getting emails and contact from a bunch of other people, not in Sydney, interestingly enough, but from some of the other metropolitan dioceses, pointing me to some of Dr. McNeil's material. And in particular, two sermons were pointed out to me. One from a few years ago where Dr. McNeil preached at the patronal festival of a church called St. Luke's here in Sydney. And she did a number of things. First of all, she flat out denied penal substitution using the usual arguments. To be fair to her, she's probably one of the only people rejecting penal substitution who I've seen represent it fairly accurately. But then she flat out denied it. And instead, she said, as we look at Luke's gospel, we see that the cross doesn't save in Luke's gospel. It's simply Jesus' presence amongst us. An interesting juxtaposition that she made deliberately. I assume she's not stupid. She's the Reverend Doctor. She knows what she's doing, and so she set those two things. She rejected penal substitution and said that in Luke's gospel, the cross doesn't save. And then also, go on, Kevin.
Well, I was going to say, for those who aren't paying attention, that's common Christian doctrine.
Well, and Anglican doctrine, of course. So,
yes.
So the 39 Articles, Article 31 sets out a clear understanding of penal substitution, and coupled in with the other articles on salvation and the homilies to which they point, it's very clear that penal substitution is the official teaching of the Anglican Church. In fact, Article 31 says there is no other understanding of the atonement. And in Australia, it may not be the case in other provinces, but in the Anglican Church of Australia, according to our constitution, which of course Reverend Dr. McNeil would have to uphold, should already uphold, and would certainly have to uphold as a bishop, according to the Constitution, the 39 Articles are a received standard of doctrine for us. So there she is, about to be appointed bishop and a focus of unity in the church. And she says that she denies the Anglican description of how we are saved. And that's a huge gone.
Well, to be fair, I've seen some male bishops do the same as well.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, Australia is not without spilling its own blood here.
Absolutely. I think the problem that we're going to have, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I'm on the record of challenging others in leadership when they take similar positions. I mean, I wrote about the Dean of Perth, John Shepherd, a while ago, and the way his stuff is accepted. I think the problem here that you've got is that she will naturally be a focus of attention. She is the first female diocesan bishop in Australia, and so whether she likes it or not, that makes her a focus of attention. Now, just as the cherry on the icing on the top of the cake of that fundamental, I'd say, denial of the gospel, I was also sent another sermon where she clearly advocates the ordination of homosexual people who are currently in a same-sex blessing. Now, that's interesting as well, of course, because we've had our issues, and I've spoken to you and your viewers about it in the past. We've had our issues with the Bishop of Gippsland, John McIntyre, doing exactly that, ordaining granting a license to a man that's in an ongoing same-sex relationship. And so here we have again someone about to become a bishop, who is the focus of unity, or meant to be, taking a position that is directly contrary to that which the bishops have set out in a recent protocol that's been renewed this year. Now, I read up my story, and it's on Stand Firm and on my own website. And what I did as well is I crafted two questions, setting out those two dichotomies of views between Reverend Dr. McNeil's and what she must uphold, hopefully, as a bishop in the church, and sent them off to her media guy at her new diocese in Grafton. Now, to be fair to him, he's a lovely, lovely guy. They are currently grappling with the national inquiry on child abuse, and it's
I've read about that. Yeah.
Grafton's turn this week
Yeah.
to go up in front of that inquiry and answer questions and so on. So he was a busy man. But in one sense, he was relieved to have something that wasn't about that. But he got back to me late yesterday afternoon and said, look, there's not going to be an answer on this question. Now, what does that do with the story here? I think what it's going to do is shift the focus of attention. Dr. McNeil obviously doesn't want to answer those questions. Who can blame her? They put her in a difficult position. What's she going to do? Repudiate previous things she said with great conviction, I think? Or will she repudiate official positions of the Anglican Church she's meant to uphold? In between a rock and a hard place. Questions now must go perhaps to the Diocese of Canberra. Bishop Stuart Robinson there is going to be consecrating Reverend Dr. McNeil. It would normally be Archbishop Davies here from Sydney that would do that, but because of a matter of conscience on women's consecration as bishops, he won't be doing that. So he's passed it off, as you would expect, to the Bishop of Canberra, Goulburn, who's Stuart Robinson, who actually appointed Dr. McNeil 2 years ago as Archdeacon in his diocese, and now he has the delight of consecrating her. He's pro-women bishops himself, or calls himself an evangelical. I think questions now might want to be asked about him. Did he know about Reverend Dr. McNeil's theological positions when he appointed as Archdeacon? Did he even ask about them? If not, why not? Because that's a fairly important position, Archdeacon. And is he still prepared to consecrate her, since she's publicly on the record opposing not only the doctrine of the Anglican Church, but also a specific position that the House of Bishops together have taken? I think those might be questions that will be asked of him next week, and hopefully his media guy will give me more of an answer than Grafton's were prepared to do.
Now, we both were in a place called Kenya, Nairobi,
Yes.
a couple weeks ago, for an event called GAFCON 2.
Yes.
And we never got a chance to sit down and record there.
No,
I was the busiest guy, you were the second busiest guy, and
It was
all
crazy.
we ever did is, hey, we got to
That's
talk.
right. We go past and waving to each other.
Yeah.
And I think we got one afternoon tea very, very briefly, but then you saw somebody you wanted to interview, and I was chasing after a whole bunch of stuff. And did you get Ica? Because I got Ica.
Yeah.
I had a great interview with Ica. Did you get Ica?
Not on the record.
You see? Nice
Now,
to meet you.
So I said, listen, we'll get a chance to Skype, and we'll get this, your take on GAFCON, or at least how GAFCON is going to be represented in Australia over time. We all know that GAFCON 1 proved that there was a need for a new voice in the church. GAFCON 2 proved that GAFCON 1 was not a one-hit wonder. We now need to see what's going to happen from here as far as Australia is concerned in its relationship with GAFCON and the message it's bringing back to Australia about GAFCON.
Yeah, so there's a number of things fundamentally that we want to ask looking forward, and the observers of GAFCON and members of GAFCON will want to ask going forward. The biggest question, I think, will continue to be, what will be the role of Sydney as influencer and participant in the GAFCON movement? GAFCON has been spearheaded and pushed forward by Dr. Peter Jensen, the Archbishop of Sydney. I mean, he's been a major force in it, and I think his tears when the communique was finally voted on and approved that last day in Nairobi were just an indication of his personal investment in that, and there's great affection for him within the GAFCON movement. With his retirement as Archbishop of Sydney, and I think stepping back now from that role of General Secretary in the next years in GAFCON, there'll be a question about what Sydney's involvement will look like. One way that we'll certainly see it is in the Theological Education Work Group that was set up at GAFCON in Nairobi. That didn't get as obviously as big a news cycle as some of the big stuff on the crisis in the communion, but that actually, I think, will prove to be a fundamentally communion-altering thing as all those in theological education got together and said, how are we going to make sure that this works out well? What are we going to do? What priorities are we going to establish? How are we going to support each other? What are the resources we're going to share? How are we going to push this forward? Recognizing that theological education is the thing that will get us going well, and also is the reason why a lot of the Western churches are in the mess that they're in. Here in Sydney, John?
One of the things that has gone unnoticed is that if you want to take back Anglicanism, the first and fastest way to do it is through the seminaries.
Absolutely.
And Peter Jensen has, obviously recognized it. You got Moore's College down there. You have a couple evangelical Orthodox places here in America.
Yep.
You got Wycliffe up in Canada. There's places where people can go and get
Yep.
a solid seminary education. Then there's all the rest.
Yes. Yes.
The
Well,
problem has been all the rest.
that's exactly it. Now, here in Sydney, if you say what's the most important institution in the diocese, those that know and understand the diocese will not say the Archbishop's office. They'll say Moore Theological College. If you want to be ordained here in Sydney, if you put your hand up and say I'd like to be considered for ordination, then it is expected you will go to Moore Theological College. And that what that has done is one of the things that has done is held an evangelical ethos with a variety of views within that, no doubt, within the diocese. When people get to catch all. Then they can go where they want. Now, interestingly enough, people have long complained about that in Sydney, but I recently heard that in another metropolitan archdiocese here in Australia, they have made the decision that ordinands cannot go to the only evangelical college in that archdiocese. They're now not allowed to go there. So it works both ways. If you want to propagate a liberal theology, you keep you guys in liberal seminaries. And if you want to propagate an evangelical, biblical, godly Anglican theology, you keep you guys in good, proper, conservative Anglican theological colleges. And so GAFCON movement has recognized that. It's very, very important. And they're making a profound effort now to coordinate that and encourage each other and get it all going. So I think that will be one of Sydney's major influences in the coming years, pushing that forward. Here in Australia, I wonder if we're going to hit the issue on same-sex marriage within the church sooner rather than later. The Perth Diocese voted overwhelmingly for a motion which basically approved of it. I mean, there was technical weasel words why it didn't do it. That was voted down by the Archbishop there, Roger Hurft, and the Provincial Council there agreed with his decision. That was knocked back. But I shouldn't imagine possibly next year in General Synod, where I'll be going, lucky me, we'll have something on that issue. Or maybe what may happen as well is that a bishop here will act on their own, break collegiality and act on their own. That will be a massive crisis for us here in Australia if that happens. And I think what you'll find is that the Fellowship of Confessing Anglicans, which is the overwhelming movement, the overriding movement that GAFCON is part of, may end up doing something here in Australia in response to that. And so one of the things that's going to come out of GAFCON is that actually liberals are probably going to go, this is for real.
George, let's move on now and talk about story 3. We're going to talk about marriage. Now, George and I can talk about marriage because I've been married for about 25 years. George, how about you?
29 years this summer.
Same wife, George? Same wife?
Yeah, same one.
Okay, good. So this is a topic that we can talk about. Now, in this world that we live in today, we're talking about different nations and different countries having different laws pertaining to marriage. Here in America, some states have what we call same-sex marriage. A female can marry a female, male can marry a male, the dog can marry the postman. Those people who have same-sex attraction are allowed to get married. They're starting to do this now in England and other countries around the world. What is the church going to do about this? Now, let's be fair. The church, the Roman Catholics have pretty much said, we only recognize the marriages we conduct. The Orthodox are pretty much in that same board. But all the rest of us are kind of left in this panacea of wondering, well, if the state is going to marry anything they want to marry, what are we going to do as a church? Because that's not marriage. That's not biblical marriage. That's not what Jesus said marriage was. That's not at all what we see as an example of marriage in the Old and New Testament. I'm a little shaken by what I see here. What should the church's response be? And there's an interesting response now from the Diocese of Western Australia back in Crocodile Dundee country, George.
Yeah, the Diocese in Northwest Australia has, its Bishop Gary Nelson has said, look, for 1,500, 2,000 years, marriage and holy matrimony were the same thing. A priest in the diocese, when he performed a ceremony of holy matrimony, he also signed the parish register and their marriage certificate. He was a civil registrar as well as performing a sacrament of the church, marriage. Now, if they introduce gay marriage in Western Australia, the bishop said, my people are no longer going to be allowed to be in the marriage business. We'll still do holy matrimony, what we understand marriage to be, but what the government's now calling marriage, we don't recognize that, we're not getting involved. Now, on the surface, it sounds a kooky idea, they're getting out of the marriage business, but the government in the United States, in several states, and in some places in Australia, is trying to shift the ground as to what marriage means, and the church in Western Australia, Northwest Australia, is saying we're not going along.
I think that's the way forward. I hate to say this, but we're going to have to now identify Christian marriage or Christian matrimony versus state or secular marriage. Because if you think state marriage is just going to stay between female, female, male, female, male, male, you're mistaken. It's not long before we're going to have polygamy and other things. The floodgates are open and nobody knows where it's going to end. We got to go over here and say, well, we have to protect Christian matrimony and Christian marriage. How are we going to do that? I was talking to a Anglo-Catholic bishop here in America, and he's like, yeah, there's something has to be done. We don't know what to do yet. We're sitting, nobody's going to want us to stop doing marriages, but is there a way that we can separate what we do from what the state says is to be done?
Now, some people worry that, a marriage ceremony in the church is a way to bring young couples into church. We shouldn't give up on that. I think that's a pretty weak argument, basically, because if the church is trying to get people to come because their parents make them to go to marriage counseling before their marriage, I just think that's just a weak way of doing it. I think the church needs to take a stand. It needs to say, this is what we understand matrimony to be, what we call marriage. And what the state is peddling these days, that's not for us.
Just be glad that the state doesn't baptize people. We'll be really working that one out of a kink too. George, let's move on to story 4, and we're going to talk about the Archbishop of Canterbury retired. What did Rowan Williams do? No, the one before him. His name was George Carey. He's famous because he married Princess Di and the guy with the big ears, Prince, what's his face? Charles. Long time ago. Yeah, that's it. And George Carey is still around, and he stood up and gave a talk at a church council meeting this week. And it was pretty well laid out, but if you weren't at the meeting, you got to hear one headline, and the headline was, listen, in 25 years, the Church of England is going to be extinct. And wow, that's pretty provocative, George.
Yeah, but Kevin, George Carey is the man people love to hate in England. He can't get a break. He can't get his speeches reported accurately and fairly. If you read the text of his address, which you could probably only do on Anglican ink, you're certainly not going to find it anywhere else, you will see that he gave a speech that was 90% optimism, upbeat. Here are the things. It was a sermon that I agreed with just about every single thing he said. It was, in fact, inspiring. It's the sort of thing that makes you think, yeah, this guy really has his pulse on the church and on the nation and on the world. And why gosh, couldn't we get another archbishop like him? But instead, they used a throwaway line saying, if we didn't do all these reforms, if we didn't put people first and the institution second, in 25 years we'll be extinct. And all that got reported was, oh, George is on his doom and gloom grind again of the end is coming. Well, folks, if it hadn't been for George Carey and the reforms he instituted 20 years ago, I think the Church of England would be dead now.
No, I think that's very true. I mean, he helped with the Alpha movement, and he encouraged that which would be helpful to the church, and discouraged that which would divide the church. He was very skillful at that. When you look at the Church of England on the ground today, if you were looking down on it, you would see that there's much of the Church of England that is dead. There's just dinosaurs in boneyards, skeletons lying around, and it may never be able to come back. Then there's certain parts of the Church of England are very healthy. They're Orthodox, they're evangelical, maybe a tinge of charismatic in there. And we heard from Paul Perkins that there's two dioceses very close to each other outside of London, where one is the dinosaur and is dying, and one is evangelical and Orthodox and is growing proportionally, visibly. And what are we going to encourage now as Church of England leaderships? Are you going to look at the growing dioceses and encourage what they're doing? Or are you going to try and preserve the dinosaurs? And I see a lot of difficulty there, George.
This week in General Synod, Johnson Tom, the Archbishop of York, put forward a proposal for the evangelization of England. And I think, yeah, good, great, wonderful. Way to go, John. However, if the focus, as the focus has been for the past 4 or 5 generations, has been on the preservation of the institution, of power struggles, of the most important thing is women bishops or racism, in other words, all the things that the Episcopal Church that drove it into near bankruptcy, 24% decline in 10 years, if the Church of England focuses on those social issues to the exclusion of preaching the Word of God, George Carey will be right, they'll be dead.
Yeah. The problem with George Carey's prediction is, I don't think it's 25 years away, I think it's 10 years away. The decline of England is precipitously, that's a big word, faster and quicker than George realizes. Same here in America. Things aren't happening anymore in decades. They're happening year by year, the way they used to happen in decades. And, you know, there was a time that as a Christian I thought maybe I would die in my bed. I believe now I may likely die in a jail somewhere because of my beliefs. And that's the quickness of what's happening here in America. George, let's close out another episode. You know, I've said that now for about 85 episodes. I need to think of something else to say. I'll think of that next week. So let's close out another episode. Great episode, lots of good features. Also a great week on Anglican Inc. George, you've posted, what, about 20, 24 stories this last week and a half?
Last 4 or 5 days, yeah.
What's the story being talked about most on Facebook?
Really, right now, it's Justin Welby and GAFCON, how they've sort of run aground, not moving any forward.
Yeah, I think
that's really popular.
The Planned Parenthood story got a lot of play on Facebook as well. It's interesting because we'll post our stories on Anglican Inc., assuming people will comment there. But anybody who's run a news service for the last 4 years knows that people will read it there, but they'll go back to Facebook to comment. We don't mind that. Just if you see a story, you want to put your opinion in there, go for it, either on Anglican Inc. or Facebook. George, now your kids are getting pretty close to the stage you need to wean them. How many do you have?
5, and they're ready for Christmas.
They're going to be ready for Christmas. Here's a picture of the brood. And now, you're not going to be shipping cats out, but if anybody's in Florida and they want to come and pick one up, you're welcome to hand over a cat and what, a free day supply of cat litter?
Yes, and well, we will ship them out. Just open the box quickly, because, you know.
I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 86 of Anglican Unscripted.
Take your time.
Got to leave Skype on. I've turned off Twitter and my mail. There we go.
Yeah, turn all anything that beeps I want off.
It's all off.
Okay, I'm just checking. Yeah, I don't need no beeping.
I know. No whiner.
You know, and my iPhone, I got my iPhone on vibrate. Yeah, I got a whine. I mean, what time is it there? It's 9:02 p.m. here.
It is 1 o'clock.
Okay. p.m.
Yes.
3, 2, What?
Hence the sun coming
I
from
don't know what's going on there.
Either that or a thermonuclear device has exploded.
That is the Holy Spirit and the Son. To the creed, okay?
Now that's illumination.
That's right.
Let's do it.
3, 2, 1.